Here's what nobody tells you about Thanksgiving. The sound a leather belt makes against an 8-year-old's legs is quieter than you'd think, almost polite, like knocking on a door you're not sure you should open. My stepfather Paul hit my son Josh because he spilled cranberry sauce. Not threw it, not played with it, spilled it. An accident that took 3 seconds, ruined in 3 minutes of violence I'll remember for 3 lifetimes. Josh's crime? Being clumsy. Being 8. Being mine. Mom stood there holding the gravy boat, ironic, really, and said, "Family first, Aaron." Like those 2 words could somehow sanitize what we just witnessed. Like tradition could trump trauma if you just believed hard enough. So I did what I'd been taught. I smiled. I served pie. I pretended the welts rising on my son's legs were somehow less real than the Norman Rockwell fantasy we were all pretending to live. But here's the thing about pretending. It only works if everyone commits to the lie. Grandma Nadia was watching from the kitchen doorway with her phone in her hand and 15 years of silence turning into something sharp and unforgivable in her chest. She'd already started making calls that would end them. That Thanksgiving, I learned 3 things. 1, my mother would choose a man over her grandson's safety. 2, I'd been building an evidence file for 3 years that would prove it. And 3, there was $185,000 in a trust fund with Josh's name on it that my mother had been stealing from since he was born. The bruises would fade. The belt would get thrown away. But the reckoning? That was just getting started. My name is Erin Winters, and I'm the kind of person who keeps 3 backup copies of birthday photos. I'm 33. I work in risk management for a medical devices company in Denver, which is a fancy way of saying I get paid to imagine worst-case scenarios and build contingency plans for disasters that probably won't happen. My boss calls me thorough. My ex-husband called me exhausting. My therapist, during our brief 6 sessions before I decided I was fine, called it hypervigilance stemming from childhood uncertainty. They're all correct. I have 47 audio recordings saved in a password-protected folder with a password I've memorized but never written down. I have 213 photographs organized by date, time, and severity level. I have a spreadsheet tracking every dollar I've loaned my mother over the past 3 years. $23,400 if you're curious, which you should be because she is not. My colleagues think I'm paranoid. My mother thinks I'm ungrateful. My son Josh thinks I'm normal, which is either the biggest success of my parenting or the saddest thing I've ever accomplished. Here's what they don't know. I started keeping this evidence the first time Paul raised his voice at Josh over a Lego tower that hadn't been put away fast enough. Josh was 5, I was 30 and recently divorced, and desperate to believe my mother had finally found happiness after my father died. I wanted so badly to believe that Paul was just old-fashioned, that his discipline was from a different generation, that my mother's phrase, "family first," meant we were supposed to protect each other. I was wrong about all of it. Because when the people who should protect your child won't, documentation isn't paranoia, it's preparation. A timestamp and a photograph are the only witnesses that can't be gaslit, manipulated, or told they're being too sensitive. I never thought I'd need a 3-year evidence file to protect my son from my own mother. That was naive. This is what happened when I finally used it. Paul thought he could get away with it. Thought family first meant silence and compliance. He was wrong. If you believe toxic family members shouldn't hide behind tradition, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you're tired of abusers getting away with it just because they're family. Comment below, have you ever had to choose between loyalty and safety? Where are you watching from? And turn on those notifications, because sometimes the best revenge is the truth, and we've got plenty more stories where justice finally wins. I learned to be quiet when I was 12. the year my father died, and my mother met Paul at a grief support group. There's a special kind of irony in falling in love with someone while you're supposed to be learning to process loss. Mom called it healing. I called it suspiciously fast, but I was 12, so nobody asked my opinion. Paul moved in 6 months later. They were married by month 9. I had a stepfather before I'd finished grieving my real one, and somehow that was supposed to feel like a gift. I learned the rules quickly. Don't contradict Paul. Don't cost too much. Don't make Mom choose between us, because we both knew who she'd pick, and it wasn't going to be me. So I became small and agreeable and graduated high school with honors and a college fund Paul had borrowed against for his truck repair business that never quite got off the ground. When I asked about the money my senior year, Mom squeezed my hand and said, "Family first, sweetheart. We all make sacrifices." I made a lot of sacrifices. By the time I had Josh, 25, divorced, and living in a Denver apartment that smelled faintly of the previous tenant's cat, I'd become an expert in managing my mother's marriage from a safe distance. I sent money when they needed it, which was often. I visited for holidays, which was mandatory. I kept my mouth shut when Paul made comments about raising Josh right and boys needing discipline, which was constant. The spreadsheet started 3 years ago, right after Paul's 63rd birthday party. I'd flown to Phoenix for the weekend, and Mom had pulled me aside in the kitchen while Paul held court in the living room about something involving carburetor compression ratios that nobody else understood or cared about. "Honey, we're a little short this month. Paul's business had some unexpected expenses. Could you help us with the mortgage? Just $1,500. We'll pay you back." I'd heard that before. The "we'll pay you back" was as reliable as Paul's business ventures, which is to say, not at all. But I wrote the check because that's what you did. Family first. That night, lying in the guest room that still had my high school debate team trophy on the shelf like a museum exhibit of the daughter I used to be, I'd opened a new spreadsheet on my phone. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, reason given. Column D, amount repaid. Column D stayed empty. Over 3 years, the number climbed. $1,500 for the mortgage became $2,000 for car repairs, became $1,800 for medical bills, became another $1,200 for property taxes. By the time Josh turned 8, I'd given them $23,400. I knew this because I'm very good at my job, and my job is calculating risk. What I wasn't calculating, what I'd actively refused to calculate, was the risk Paul posed to Josh. The signs were there. I documented them without admitting what I was documenting. Paul's voice getting sharper when Josh was too loud at the dinner table, his jokes about kids today being soft and undisciplined, the way he'd grabbed Josh's shoulder just a little too hard when redirecting him, leaving my son stiff and quiet for the rest of the visit. I told myself it was just Paul being Paul, old-fashioned, gruff, from a generation that believed in tough love and not sparing the rod. I told myself Josh and I would visit less, keep the trips shorter, maintain boundaries. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be convenient lies. The audio recording started the Christmas Josh was 6, after Paul had barked at him for opening a present wrong. Apparently, there's a correct way to tear wrapping paper, and Josh had violated it. I'd started keeping my phone in my pocket during visits, voice memo app open, just in case, just for documentation, just so I could prove I wasn't overreacting when I replayed the interactions later in my car, sitting in a Target parking lot, trying to decide if I was crazy or if something was actually wrong. I had 47 recordings by this Thanksgiving. I had 213 photographs, most of them innocuous, Josh playing in Mom's backyard, holiday dinners, family snapshots. But 17 of them showed things that made my stomach hurt. Josh's arm with finger-shaped bruises after Paul had grabbed him too hard while teaching him to throw a football. A red mark on Josh's wrist from being pulled away from the stove. Documentation I'd convinced myself was just me being thorough. The night before Thanksgiving, Josh had asked me if we really had to go to Grandma Tanya's. "It's just for 2 days, buddy," I said, packing his overnight bag. "Grandma wants to see you." "But does he want to see me?" I should have listened. I should have trusted the instinct of an 8-year-old who knew something I was still pretending not to know. Instead, I said, "Of course he does. We're family." 24 hours later, Josh was crying in the bathroom while I photographed the welts on his legs, and I was calculating exactly how much it would cost to never speak to my mother again. Turns out, the answer was $185,000 I didn't even know existed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First came the cranberry sauce. Then came the belt. Then came the moment my mother chose her husband over her grandson's tears and said those 2 words that used to mean love, but now only meant complicity. I was already calculating, already documenting, already done. I just didn't know that Grandma Nadia had beaten me to it. The photographs took 6 minutes. I know because I checked the timestamp later. When I was organizing them into the folder, I'd labeled Evidence, Do Not Delete, with the kind of redundant emphasis that suggested I'd known all along what I was building. 6 minutes to document what took Paul less than 3 to create. Josh sat on the closed toilet lid in my mother's guest bathroom, the one with the seashell soap dispenser and the decorative towels nobody was allowed to use. His legs were still red, the welts rising in perfect parallel lines like some kind of grotesque barcode. He wasn't crying anymore. That might have been worse. "Does it hurt?" I asked, which was a stupid question, but I needed him to say something, anything. "A little," he said, which meant a lot, because Josh had learned early that admitting pain only made things harder. I crouched down with my phone, adjusting the angle to catch the overhead light. Clinical. Detached, the way I'd photograph a defective medical device at work. Clear focus, proper lighting, timestamp enabled. Evidence isn't emotional. Evidence is factual. Evidence holds up in court. I was thinking about court while photographing my 8-year-old son's injuries. That should have felt more shocking than it did. "I need to take some pictures, okay, buddy? Just so we have a record." He nodded. He didn't ask why. He was 8 years old and already understood that sometimes you need proof that something happened because the people who saw it would pretend they didn't. I took 11 photos from different angles. Then I opened the encrypted folder on my phone, the one that required both a password and my fingerprint because I'm nothing if not thorough, and watched the number tick up. Photo 214, photo 215, photo 225, 47 audio recordings. 225 photographs, one spreadsheet tracking $23,400 in loans, one PDF of text messages, one Word document with a timeline of incidents I'd titled Josh Behavioral Notes, like I was conducting a case study instead of watching my son get hurt. 3 years of evidence I had told myself I was collecting just in case. Well, this was the case. I helped Josh into his pajama pants, the soft ones with the dinosaurs that were getting too small but he refused to throw away, and led him downstairs. Mom was in the kitchen washing dishes with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she was trying very hard not to think about what had just happened. Paul was in the living room watching football, volume too loud, beer in hand, completely unbothered. "We're leaving," I said. Mom turned, hands still sudsy. "Aaron, don't be dramatic. He's fine. You were spanked as a child and you turned out." I was never beaten with a belt for spilling sauce. It wasn't a beating, it was discipline. You're overreacting. Family first, remember? We don't just... "We're leaving," I repeated. "Now." I had our bags packed in 4 minutes. I'd learned to travel light. The drive back to Denver took 9 hours. I stopped once at a rest area outside Albuquerque where Josh finally fell asleep in the back seat, and I sat in the parking lot under the fluorescent lights and realized my hands were shaking. They hadn't been shaking when I took the photos. They hadn't been shaking when I packed my bags, but now, alone in a rest stop at 11 p.m. with nothing to do but feel, they wouldn't stop. I pulled out my phone and composed a text to my mother, deleted it. Wrote another one, deleted that too. Tried 7 different versions before I settled on the one that felt true. We won't be visiting anymore. I have photos, recordings, and a lawyer. Don't contact us. Sent. Then I blocked her number, blocked her email, blocked her on Facebook, Instagram, and the Scrabble app where she had been beating me for 3 years because she used an online dictionary and I was too polite to call her out for cheating. Politeness was over. We got back to Denver at 4 a.m. I carried Josh inside, still sleeping, tucked him into his bed, and sat on my couch in the dark apartment eating leftover Halloween candy for breakfast because I'd forgotten to buy groceries before we left, and crying seemed more productive than Instacart. At 8 a.m., I called our pediatrician's office. The receptionist said they were closed for the holiday weekend. I said I'd wait in the parking lot until Monday if I had to, but my son needed to be seen, and I needed documentation, and I wasn't asking. She put me through to the on-call nurse. We had an appointment at 10. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo had been Josh's pediatrician since he was 2 months old. She'd seen him through ear infections and growth spurts and the time he ate an entire bag of gummy vitamins because he thought they were regular gummies. She'd never seen him like this. She didn't say much while she examined him, just made notes in her tablet with the kind of careful precision that told me she knew exactly what she was documenting and why. When she finished, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "I'm obligated to file a report." "Good," I said. "I want you to." She nodded. "You're doing the right thing." I wasn't sure I believed her. The right thing felt like it should hurt less. The police report took 2 hours at the Denver PD substation. The officer who took my statement was maybe 26, with a name tag that read Officer Chen and an expression that suggested he'd heard worse, but wished he hadn't. He was thorough, professional. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. He asked if I felt safe. I said I would be. He gave me a case number and a victim services pamphlet and told me someone would be in touch. I drove home, made Josh mac and cheese from a box, and watched him eat it while sitting on the couch with his dinosaur blanket, and I thought, this is what protection looks like. Not perfect, not pretty, just present. My phone buzzed 17 times that afternoon, all of them from numbers I didn't recognize. Mom calling from other people's phones, trying to get through. I blocked every single one. I didn't know it yet, but Grandma Nadia was about to call me from a number I'd never seen before either. That one, I'd answer. Grandma Nadia showed up at my apartment on Sunday morning with an accordion file, a rolling suitcase, and the kind of expression that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. I was betting on my mother. "You going to let me in, or are we having this conversation in the hallway?" she asked, already pushing past me with the confidence of a woman who'd raised 3 daughters through the 70s and wasn't about to wait for an engraved invitation. I hadn't seen Nadia in almost a year. She lived in Scottsdale, about 20 minutes from Mom and Paul, but our relationship had been distant. Polite birthday cards and occasional phone calls where we discussed the weather and avoided discussing her daughter. I'd always assumed she was Team Tanya by default. Family loyalty and all that. I was wrong about a lot of things. "Is Josh here?" she asked, scanning my apartment like she was cataloging exits. "At a friend's house. Playdate. I needed him to have a normal Sunday." I closed the door. "How did you know where I live?" "I'm 71, not incompetent. I have Google." She set the accordion file on my kitchen table with the kind of deliberate thunk that suggested weight, both literal and metaphorical. "We need to talk about what happened Thursday." "Mom called you?" "Your mother has called me 47 times since Friday. I haven't answered." She pulled out a chair and sat down like she owned the place. "I'm not here because of Tanya. I'm here because of what I saw and what I've been documenting for the past 5 years." That stopped me mid-reach for the coffee pot. "You've been what?" "Documenting." She patted the accordion file. "Paul's temper, the financial irregularities, your mother's selective blindness. I knew eventually it would escalate to something like Thursday. I just didn't know it would be Josh." I sat down slowly, trying to process the fact that my 71-year-old grandmother had apparently been running a parallel surveillance operation. Why didn't you say something? To who? Your mother? Nadia laughed, sharp and bitter. Tanya made her choice the day she married him. I learned a long time ago you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. But I could prepare for the day you'd need ammunition. She opened the accordion file and pulled out a stack of papers that looked like it had been organized by someone who understood the Dewey Decimal System. Tabs, color coding, the works. I have bank statements, tax returns, and copies of documents I obtained through methods I will not be discussing because plausible deniability is important. She slid the first stack toward me. Let's start with the money your father left you when he died. My father? David Winters. Dead at 43 from a heart attack that nobody saw coming except apparently his body. He'd been gone 21 years, long enough that my memories of him had started feeling more like photographs than actual experiences. Dad didn't leave me anything. There was some life insurance, but Mom used it to pay off the house, and your father left you everything. Nadia's voice was flat, factual, the way you'd tell someone their flight was canceled, not that their entire understanding of their inheritance was a lie. Life insurance, $230,000, 401k, $112,000, and a protected educational trust for any future grandchildren, $185,000. The numbers hung in the air like something solid I could grab onto, except my hands had gone numb. That's over $500,000. $340,000 after taxes and fees, give or take. She pulled out another document. Your father was meticulous. He knew he had a heart history of heart disease. He prepared. I stared at the bank statement she'd slid across the table. The trust account had Josh's full name on it, Joshua David Winters, and a current balance that made my stomach drop. 43,000? My voice came out strangled. It should be 185,000. Yes. She pulled out more papers. They've been withdrawing from it since Josh was born. 10,000 here, 15,000 there, all with forged signatures authorizing the withdrawals as educational expenses. She showed me copies of withdrawal slips. My signature, clear as day, on documents I'd never seen before. My handwriting, except not quite. The E in Aaron's slightly wrong, the loop on the W in Winters too white. Paul's a decent forger. Not good enough to fool a professional, but good enough to fool a bank teller who's processing 50 transactions a day. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the math that kept recalculating in my head. $185,000 minus $43,000 equals $142,000 stolen from my son. Plus the $230,000 life insurance that should have gone to me. Plus the 401k. Mom knew. It wasn't a question. Your mother has known about every dollar since the day Paul suggested they reallocate some of David's funds to pay for the wedding. Her expression was carved granite. I told her it was theft. She told me it was family taking care of family, and that I needed to mind my own business. Why didn't you? Because I had no legal standing. You were a minor when it started, and by the time you were 18, you'd already been conditioned to not ask questions. She pulled out a business card, cream-colored with embossed lettering. Wallace Brennan, attorney at law, estate planning and fiduciary litigation. She said. I've already briefed him. He's been waiting for this call for 3 years. I looked at the card, at the bank statements, at the forged signatures, at the accordion file that represented 5 years of my grandmother's quiet fury, organized into tabs and documentation. You've been planning this? I've been preparing for it. There's a difference. She reached across the table and took my hand. Hers was dry and cool and surprisingly strong. Your father left you that money so you'd be safe, so Josh would be safe, so you'd never have to depend on anyone who'd hurt you. Her voice cracked on the last word. Tanya stole that from you, and I will not die knowing I let her get away with it. I held the business card and thought about my father, who I barely remembered, but who'd apparently loved me enough to plan for my future, even knowing he might not see it. I thought about Josh, who deserved that $185,000 for college or trade school or whatever dream he'd have that I couldn't fund on my risk management salary. I thought about my mother, who'd stolen it all and called it family. What do I do? I asked. Nadia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd been waiting 5 years to burn something down. You call Wallace, and then we make them pay back every single dollar. Wallace Brennan's office was on the 16th floor of a building downtown with the kind of understated elegance that suggested his hourly rate had 3 digits before the decimal point. Nadia had assured me he was worth every penny, and also doing this partially pro bono because your father was his college roommate and he's been waiting 20 years to stick it to Tanya. Apparently, my father had good taste in friends. Wallace was 60-something, with steel gray hair and reading glasses that he kept taking off and putting back on like punctuation marks. He spread the documents across his conference table with the reverence of someone unveiling evidence at a murder trial, which, financially speaking, this kind of was. Let's start with what we can prove, he said, tapping a stack of papers. The trust fund for Joshua was established by your father's estate, protected under specific provisions that required both parental signatures for any withdrawal over $5,000. He showed me the original trust documents, my father's handwriting on the beneficiary line. Joshua David Winters, future grandchild. The date? 3 months before he died. Your father knew, I said quietly. He knew his time might be limited. He prepared accordingly. He pulled out another stack. These are the withdrawal records. $87,000 over 8 years. Every single authorization form has your signature. Want to tell me which ones you actually signed? I flipped through them. 15 documents spanning 8 years. My name. Over and over. Authorizing withdrawals for private school tuition, educational materials, tutoring services. Josh went to public school. I bought his books at Target. The only tutoring he ever gotten was for me at our kitchen table, teaching him to read with library books about dinosaurs. None of them, I said. I didn't sign any of these. Excellent. That makes this fraud. Wallace smiled like a man who enjoyed his job immensely. Now let's talk about the life insurance and 401k that should have gone to you as David's daughter and beneficiary. The numbers made me dizzy. $230,000 in life insurance that Mom had claimed barely covered the funeral and mortgage. $112,000 in retirement funds that had somehow been eaten up by estate taxes and debts. Where did it go? I asked. Wallace pulled out more papers. Bank statements, property records, credit card receipts from 2004 through 2010. They refinanced the house, which was already paid off, and took out $200,000 in equity, bought a vacation cabin in Flagstaff, purchased 3 vehicles, took 5 cruises. He looked at me over his glasses. Your mother and Paul spent your inheritance on their lifestyle while telling you there was nothing left. Nadia made a sound like she was trying not to spit. So what can we do? I asked. Wallace leaned back in his chair with the expression of a chess player who'd been waiting 6 moves to say checkmate. Let's start with a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion of assets. We'll seek full restitution plus interest. That's approximately $430,000. We'll also file for emergency custody protection to ensure Paul has no access to Joshua, and I'll help you get a restraining order. In criminal charges? Nadia asked. The forgery is prosecutable. So is the child abuse. You filed a police report, which was smart. The DA will make the final call, but with your documentation and the medical records, we have a strong case. He looked at me. This won't be easy. Your mother will fight. Paul will fight harder. They'll try to paint you as vindictive, dramatic, trying to destroy the family over a simple spanking. He beat my son with a belt and stole his college fund, I said flatly. I don't care what they paint me as. Good, because I need you to authorize me to pursue everything. Civil, criminal, the whole war. Are you in? I thought about Josh asking if we really had to go to Grandma's. I thought about my father who died planning for my protection. I thought about 3 years of spreadsheets and 47 audio recordings and 225 photographs that I'd collected because some part of me had always known this day was coming. All of it, I said. Every charge, every dollar, everything. Wallace smiled. Let's go ruin their Christmas. The restraining order was granted 48 hours later. Temporary, pending a full hearing, but legally binding. Paul was to stay at least 500 feet from me and Josh. No contact, no exceptions. He showed up at my apartment 3 days after that. I'd just gotten home from work, still in my blazer and heels that made my feet hurt, contemplating whether I had the energy to cook dinner or if we were going with cereal again. Josh was safe at Nadia's for the evening. She'd started doing Grandma Wednesdays, where she'd pick him up from school and feed him actual vegetables, which made her a better parent than I was managing to be. The knock was aggressive, too loud, too insistent. I checked the peephole, and my stomach dropped. Paul stood there, red-faced, in his work jacket with oil stains, looking like he'd driven straight from Phoenix without stopping to consider that showing up at my door violated a court order. I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, hit record, slipped it into my pocket with the microphone facing out. Then I opened the door exactly 6 inches, keeping the chain lock engaged. You need to leave, I said. Calm, factual, the way I'd tell someone they were in the wrong conference room. You need to talk about this nonsense you're pulling. You're destroying this family over a simple spanking. Your mother is devastated. You're going to drop these charges and... I have a restraining order that says you need to stay 500 feet away from me. You're currently about 3 feet away. Leave. You don't threaten me with... I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you that you're violating a court order. You have 30 seconds to leave before I call the police. His face went darker. You think you're so smart with your lawyers and your... 20 seconds. I'm trying to be reasonable here. 15 seconds. I pulled out my phone, keeping it visible. I'm calling 911. Would you like to still be here when they arrive? For a long moment, we stared at each other through the 6-inch gap. I could see him calculating, deciding whether I was bluffing. I started dialing. He left. I waited until I heard his truck start in the parking lot, watched through the window until he pulled away, and then I called 911 anyway. I need to report a restraining order violation. And my voice only shook a little. The police came, took my statement, listened to the recording, filed an additional report that Wallace would use to request an extended order. I called Nadia and told her what happened. Good, she said. You didn't let him in. You didn't engage. You documented. Your father would be proud. I sat on my couch in the apartment that smelled like leftover takeout and fear. And I thought, this is what winning feels like. Not triumphant, not satisfying, just safe. just finally impossibly safe. The criminal trial took 4 months from start to finish, which Wallace said was remarkably fast for the system, but felt like 4 years of holding my breath underwater. Paul took a plea deal in March, 18 months in minimum security for felony child abuse and fraud. His lawyer had apparently explained that going to trial with medical records, photographs, forged bank documents, and a recording of him violating a restraining order was what legal professionals call a terrible idea. Tanya's case was messier. She'd initially claimed she didn't know about the forged signatures, which fell apart when Wallace produced email records showing she'd discussed the withdrawals with Paul 17 times over 8 years. She tried, "I was protecting the family assets," which didn't play well when those assets included cruise tickets to the Bahamas purchased with money meant for her grandson's education. She got 2 years probation, lost all custody and visitation rights pending Josh's consent as an adult, and had to sit in a courtroom while a judge told her she'd failed as a mother and a grandmother. I didn't feel as satisfied by that as I'd expected to. The civil case settled in April. The house in Phoenix and the cabin in Flagstaff were both liquidated. After legal fees and the outstanding mortgage Paul had taken against property that was already paid off, we recovered $243,000. Not the full amount, but enough. Enough for Josh's college fund to be rebuilt. Enough for me to finally stop checking my bank balance 3 times a day and panicking. Enough to prove that documentation and timestamps and 3 years of careful evidence collection could actually matter. Wallace had framed it differently when he handed me the settlement check. "Your father's love for you just came back with interest." I'd cried in his fancy conference room while Nadia patted my hand and made jokes about how we should all go to a casino to celebrate, except she didn't trust establishments that gave you free drinks because nothing free ever was. Derek called me 2 days after the sentencing. Derek was Paul's son from his first marriage, technically my stepbrother, though we'd never been close. He was 37, lived in Tucson, and had perfected the art of pretending his father's violence was everyone else's fault but his father's. "You destroyed our family," he said. No preamble, no hello, just immediate accusation like he'd been rehearsing. I was at Target, standing in the cereal aisle trying to decide if Josh was old enough for the kind with marshmallows, or if that made me a bad parent. The call came through my car's Bluetooth even though I was still in the parking lot. "Your father beat my 8-year-old son," I said, abandoning the cereal decision, "and your stepmother stole his college fund. I documented it and pressed charges. That's not destroying a family. That's protecting my child." "It was just discipline. Kids today are too soft. You're being dramatic." "He left welts on Josh's legs for spilling cranberry sauce. So, my dad spanked me all the time. I turned out fine." I thought about the 3 times I'd seen Derek in the past 10 years. Once at Paul's birthday party where he'd gotten drunk and punched a hole in the drywall over a football game. Once at Christmas where he'd screamed at his girlfriend in the driveway. And once at a family barbecue where he'd grabbed his son's arm so hard the kid had yelped. "Derek," I said carefully, "you did not turn out fine." Silence. "Family first," he said finally, like those 2 words were a spell that could rewrite reality. "That's what Mom always said. You're supposed to protect family." I did protect family. I protected Josh. That's what family actually means. Protecting the people who can't protect themselves, not enabling abusers because you share DNA. "You sent our father to prison." "Your father sent himself to prison when he committed multiple felonies. I just made sure he got caught." He hung up. I sat in the Target parking lot for another 10 minutes, then went inside and bought the cereal with marshmallows because life's too short and Josh deserved something sweet. The diary arrived the next week. Nadia brought it over in a shoebox that smelled like old paper and secrets. She said, "I found this when I was cleaning out some boxes from storage. Tanya left it at my house when she moved in with Paul. I've been holding on to it because," she paused, "because I thought you might need to see it someday. Today feels like someday." It was a journal from 2003, the year my mother met Paul. Floral cover, pages yellowed at the edges, filled with my mother's looping handwriting that I recognized from grocery lists and birthday cards. Most of it was mundane. Grief group meetings, how much she missed my father, how lonely she felt, how Paul seemed kind and attentive and made her laugh. Then, buried in an entry from July, Paul told me about his first marriage today. He said his ex-wife was bitter and turned his kids against him. He admitted he had a temper back then, that he disciplined too hard sometimes, but he's different now. He's been to therapy. He's changed. Everyone deserves a second chance, right? The way he looks at me makes me feel alive again. I know Nadia has concerns, but she doesn't understand how hard it is to be alone. I'm choosing to believe in him. I'm choosing happiness. I read it 3 times. She'd known. Before they got married. Before she let him move into the house that my father had paid for. Before she let him anywhere near me. She'd known Paul had a history of violence toward children, and she'd chosen him anyway. Because being alone was scarier than risking her daughter. Nadia watched me read, her face carved from something ancient and unforgiving. She said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't stop her. I'm sorry I didn't know how." I closed the diary and put it back in the shoebox. You stopped her eventually. That's what matters. Is it enough? I thought about Josh thriving in therapy and public school and a home where the loudest thing was his laughter. I thought about the $243,000 sitting in a protected trust account that would send him to college or trade school or wherever his dreams took him. I thought about how I'd learned that love wasn't obligation, that family wasn't an excuse, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was say no more and mean it. Yeah, it's enough. 18 months later, I owned a house. Not a condo, not an apartment that smelled like someone else's cat. An actual house with a yard and a mortgage and a sprinkler system I didn't know how to program, but was determined to figure out eventually. 3 bedrooms in a Denver suburb with good schools and sidewalks where kids rode bikes without helmets, in defiance of every safety regulation I'd ever read. I'd used part of the settlement for the down payment. The rest went into Josh's trust fund, properly protected this time, with only my signature required, and a trustee who wasn't related to anyone with a history of fraud. Wallace had recommended him. I'd verified his credentials anyway because some habits die hard, and I wasn't apologizing for paranoia that had turned out to be justified. Nadia had sold her place in Scottsdale 3 months after the trial. Too hot, she'd said. Too many memories of standing in Tanya's kitchen pretending everything was fine. She'd bought a smaller house 2 streets over from mine, painted it yellow because, at 72, I'll paint my house whatever color I damn well please, and installed a doorbell camera that she checked obsessively because apparently hypervigilance was genetic. Josh was 10 now, 4th grade. New school where nobody knew our history, and he was just the kid who knows everything about dinosaurs and is weirdly good at Foursquare. He'd been in therapy for a 1.5 years with Dr. Rashida Chen, who specialized in childhood trauma and had given him language for things he'd been too young to name. He still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched when people raised their voices, still asked me periodically if I was sure we didn't have to visit Grandma Tanya for holidays. I was always sure. Christmas Eve came with snow that the Weather Service had promised wouldn't stick, but did anyway, covering our street in 3 inches of the kind of perfect white that made everything look clean and possible. Josh had insisted on making cookies for Santa, even though he'd stopped believing in Santa 2 years ago, but liked the tradition too much to give it up. "We need to make some for Grandma Nadia, too," he'd said, rolling out dough on the kitchen counter that still smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings, "because she's real and Santa's not, so she deserves more cookies." Solid logic, I'd agreed. Nadia had arrived at 6 with a bag of proper sprinkles, not that sad grocery store nonsense, and a bottle of wine for me that she insisted was medicinal because Christmas is stressful even when it's good. Now we were in the kitchen, 3 generations, flour everywhere, Christmas music playing from my phone because I still hadn't figured out the smart speaker situation. Josh was decorating a snowman cookie with enough frosting to constitute a structural engineering problem. Nadia was telling a story about her mother's terrible fruitcake recipe that allegedly broke a tooth in 1967. I was trying to pipe icing onto a star and failing magnificently. It was chaotic, messy, perfect. Is it weird that I'm not sad about not seeing them? Josh asked suddenly, not looking up from his snowman's face, which now had 6 eyes because regular snowmen are boring, Mom. The kitchen went quiet, except for Bing Crosby crooning about white Christmases. I set down my piping bag and crouched next to him, eye level, the way Dr. Chen had taught me. No, baby, that's called healing. Derek's mom sent him a card, he said. Derek was his best friend from school, no relation to my stepbrother of the same name, which had been confusing exactly once before we all agreed to just accept it. For Christmas, from his grandma, and I was thinking about how I don't have cards from Grandma Tanya, and He paused, concentrated on adding a 7th eye. I don't miss it. Is that bad? Do you want to miss it? I asked. He thought about it, with the seriousness of someone who'd learned feelings were complicated and honesty mattered more than politeness. No, he said finally. I like it better now. Grandma Nadia doesn't yell. You don't get that face. What face? The face you used to get when we'd drive to Phoenix, like you were trying to smile but also preparing for something bad. He looked at me with eyes that were too wise for 10. You don't make that face anymore. I kissed his forehead right between the eyebrows where he still had a faint scar from falling off the monkey bars in 2nd grade. That's because nothing bad is coming. We're safe now. Because of the documentation and the lawyers and Grandma Nadia's accordion file? Because we chose each other, Nadia said quietly from across the kitchen. Real family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who protects you, who sits in your kitchen on Christmas Eve making cookies with too much frosting and doesn't pretend everything is fine when it's not. Josh considered this while adding an 8th eye to his snowman, because apparently we were going full Lovecraft with the Christmas cookies. Can I put black frosting on this one? I want to make a goth tree. Why not? Nadia said, handing him the piping bag with dark frosting. Christmas is for expressing yourself. I looked at my son, decorating cookies with aggressive creativity and 0 trauma responses. I looked at my grandmother, who spent 5 years documenting abuse because she'd known I'd need it, even when I didn't know myself. I looked at our kitchen, with its slightly crooked cabinet installation, and the mortgage I never thought I'd have, and the life we'd built from evidence folders and court orders and the stubborn insistence that love was supposed to feel safe. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, Josh asked Nadia if she thought Santa would appreciate a goth tree, or if it was too edgy for his brand, and Nadia said Santa needed to expand his aesthetic anyway. I took a picture, not for evidence this time, just for memory. Just for proof that sometimes the best revenge is building something better than what you left behind. That night, after Josh went to bed and Nadia headed home with a plate of cookies and a hug that lasted longer than usual, I sat on my couch in my house that smelled like sugar and cinnamon and freedom. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a second, my stomach clenched. Old habits, old fears. But when I opened it, it was just a photo from Nadia. The 3 of us in the kitchen, flour on our faces, laughing at something I couldn't remember but could feel in the image. Her text underneath, "This is what family first actually means." I saved it to my favorites and titled it Home. Then I blocked the unknown number anyway. Some habits die hard, and some habits keep you safe. I was fine with both. Paul and Tanya thought family first meant Aaron would stay silent forever. They were dead wrong. If you're glad Erin chose herself and Josh over toxic loyalty, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories where the victims become victors. Comment your thoughts. What would you have done in Erin's position? Where are you watching from? Hit that notification bell because we're exposing every manipulator who thinks family means forever getting away with abuse. Justice isn't just served cold here, it's documented, prosecuted, and permanent.